My name is Catherine, and this is the story of how my life took an unexpected turn. Fresh out of college with a law degree, I landed a job as a lawyer's assistant at a large trading company. The company's offices were a maze of cubicles and departments. On my third day, while trying to find the copy room, I quite literally bumped into Mark from the purchasing department. "Whoa there," he laughed, steadying me. "You must be new." "I'm Mark." "Catherine," I replied, feeling my cheeks flush. "I'm the new lawyer's assistant." "And yes, I'm a bit lost." Mark's eyes twinkled. "Well, Catherine, consider me your personal GPS. Where are you headed?" From that moment, Mark and I became friends. We'd chat during lunch breaks, and he'd always find an excuse to drop by my department. As the weeks passed, our friendship deepened into something more. One Friday evening, as we were leaving work, Mark turned to me. "Hey, Catherine, want to grab dinner? There's this great Italian place around the corner." I hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "I'd love to." That dinner marked the beginning of our romantic relationship. We dated for a year, our bond growing stronger with each passing day. Mark was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner: kind, funny, and supportive. On our first anniversary, Mark proposed. We were married 6 months later in a small ceremony with our closest friends and family. Mark's mother, Linda, attended but seemed less than thrilled. She'd always been a bit cold towards me, and I overheard her muttering to a relative during the reception. "He could have done better," she said, not realizing I was within earshot. "There are so many successful, rich girls out there." But no, he had to choose her. Her words stung, but I tried not to let them dampen my happiness. Mark loved me, and that was all that mattered. After the wedding, we decided to buy an apartment. I had inherited a substantial sum from my grandmother, so Mark and I were able to split the cost 50-50. It was a cozy 2-bedroom place in a nice neighborhood, perfect for starting our life together. A year into our marriage, life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Mark and I were both doing well at work, and our weekends were filled with lazy mornings and exploring the city. Everything seemed perfect, until the day I woke up feeling off. At first, I brushed it off as a simple stomach bug. But as days passed and the nausea persisted, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a possibility I hadn't considered. Could I be pregnant? One morning, I decided to find out for sure. I bought a pregnancy test on my way to work and snuck into the office bathroom during my lunch break. Those 2 minutes of waiting were the longest of my life. When I finally looked at the stick, my heart skipped a beat. 2 pink lines. That evening, I decided to surprise Mark with the news. I picked up his favorite takeout and set the table with candles. When he walked in, his eyebrows shot up. "What's the occasion?" he asked, hanging up his coat. I took a deep breath. "Mark, I have something to tell you. I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, confusion, and then, disappointment. "Are you sure?" he finally asked, his voice strained. I nodded, my earlier excitement fading. "I took a test today. It's positive." Mark sank into a chair, running a hand through his hair. "Catherine, don't you think it's too soon? We've only been married a year. We haven't even had time to enjoy each other yet. Maybe we should consider our options?" I felt like I'd been doused in ice water. "Options? Are you suggesting an abortion?" Mark shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "It's just something to think about. We're both building our careers. A baby would change everything." I stood up, my hands shaking. "I can't believe what I'm hearing. This is our child, Mark. I'm keeping it." The next few days were tense. Mark and I danced around each other, the elephant in the room growing larger by the minute. I decided to see a doctor, hoping for some good news to change Mark's mind. The visit didn't go as I'd hoped. The doctor, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Patel, looked at me with concern after the examination. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm afraid your pregnancy is high risk," she said gently. "You'll need to be very careful." Less stress, more rest, and plenty of relaxation. I felt my world tilting. What does that mean for the baby? Dr. Patel squeezed my hand. It means we'll need to monitor you closely. There's a risk of miscarriage, but with proper care, we can minimize that risk. I left the clinic in a daze. How was I supposed to have less stress when my own husband didn't want our baby? When I got home, I found Mark watching TV. How did it go? He asked, not looking away from the screen. I took a deep breath. The pregnancy is high risk. I need to reduce stress and rest more. I'm going to ask if I can work remotely. Mark's jaw clenched. Catherine, I really think we need to reconsider this. It's not too late to... Stop, I cut him off. I've made my decision, Mark. I'm having this baby, with or without your support. The next morning, I approached my boss, Mr. Jameson, with trepidation. I explained my situation and requested to work remotely. To my relief, he was understanding and agreed immediately. Your health and your baby's health come first, Catherine, he said kindly. We'll set you up with everything you need to work from home. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but it was short-lived. When I told Mark about the arrangement, his reaction was less than enthusiastic. Great, he muttered. So you'll be home all day, doing what exactly? I stared at him, incredulous. Working, Mark. And taking care of myself and our baby. He scoffed and walked away, leaving me feeling more alone than ever. As the weeks passed, I threw myself into my work and preparing for the baby. I read every pregnancy book I could find, started eating healthier, and even took up prenatal yoga. Meanwhile, Mark grew more distant. He started staying late at work, claiming he had to pick up my slack. On weekends, he'd suddenly have business trips that he'd never mentioned before. I tried to talk to him about it, but he'd brush me off. One evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, the doorbell rang. It was Mark's mother, Linda. I thought I'd drop by and see how you're doing, she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I invited her in, trying to ignore the way her gaze critically swept over my growing belly. Mark tells me you're working from home now, she said, settling onto our couch. I nodded. Yes, the doctor advised it for the baby's health. You know, Catherine, a child isn't always the blessing people make it out to be. Especially when it comes at the wrong time. I felt my hackles rise. There's never a perfect time for a baby, Linda. We'll manage. She leaned forward, her voice lowering. Are you sure about that? Mark is young, ambitious. He needs a partner who can support his career, not hold him back. Don't make him regret his choice. A few days later, as Mark was getting ready for work, I caught a whiff of something unfamiliar. A perfume, floral and sweet, that definitely wasn't mine. I froze, my mind racing. New cologne? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Mark looked startled for a moment before shrugging. Oh, yeah, got it as a sample. Like it? I forced a smile. It's nice. But as he left for work, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The perfume wasn't cologne, and it certainly wasn't a sample. It was expensive women's perfume, and it clung to my husband's shirt like a silent accusation. The next morning, after Mark left for work, I picked up my phone with shaking hands. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for, my cousin, Jack. He worked for a detective agency, and if anyone could help me uncover the truth, it was him. Hey, Kath, Jack answered cheerfully. What's up? I took a deep breath. Jack, I need your help. It's about Mark. I explained everything, the late nights, the business trips, the perfume. My voice broke as I finished. I think he's cheating on me, Jack. I need to know for sure. Jack's voice was gentle when he replied. I'll look into it, Kath. Give me a few weeks, okay? Meanwhile, I threw myself into my work and preparing for the baby. I ordered a crib, started looking at paint swatches for the nursery, anything to keep my mind occupied. But the gnawing fear in my gut wouldn't go away. Finally, after 3 agonizing weeks, Jack called. "Can you meet me at the cafe on 5th Street?" he asked, his voice serious. An hour later, I sat across from Jack in a quiet corner of the cafe. He slid a manila envelope across the table. "I'm sorry, Catherine," he said softly. "But you were right." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Mark entering hotels, Mark at restaurants, Mark walking in the park. And in every single one, he was with the same woman, young, blonde, beautiful. "Her name is Melissa," Jack explained. "She's a new employee in Mark's department. They'd been seeing each other for at least a month, maybe longer." I stared at the photos, feeling numb. How could he do this? Jack reached out and squeezed my hand. "There's more. Mark told you he's on a business trip this weekend, right?" I nodded, dreading what was coming next. "He lied," Jack said. "He's with her right now. At the Westview Hotel, room 412. The world seemed to tilt around me. The taxi ride home was a blur. When I finally stumbled through my front door, clutching the envelope of damning photos, I was surprised to find Linda, my mother-in-law, in the living room. "Oh, Catherine," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I thought I'd come clean the house while Mark's on his business trip. Lord knows you don't do much around here these days." Her words, on top of everything else, were the last straw. "He's not on a business trip," I snapped. "He's with his mistress right now." Linda's eyes widened for a moment before narrowing. "Well, if he is, and I'm not saying he is, can you blame him? Look at you. You're always sick, you've let yourself go, and you never pay attention to him anymore. This whole pregnancy was a mistake. No one wants this baby except you." Something inside me snapped. "Get out," I hissed. "Get out of my house right now." Linda looked shocked for a moment, then sneered. "Gladly. Don't come crying to me when Mark leaves you." As the front door slammed behind Linda, I sat on the floor, my mind reeling from her cruel words. But as the initial shock wore off, a new emotion took its place, determination. I couldn't just sit here while my husband betrayed me. With shaking hands, I pulled myself up and grabbed my car keys. I knew where Mark was, and I was going to confront him. The drive to the Westview Hotel was a blur, my thoughts a chaotic mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief. Before I knew it, I was standing in front of room 412. I could hear laughter from inside, Mark's deep chuckle, and a woman's high-pitched giggle. My stomach churned, but I steeled myself and knocked on the door. "Must be room service," a woman's voice called out cheerfully. "We've been waiting for that champagne." My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The door swung open, and there stood Mark, his smile freezing as he saw me. "Catherine," he stammered, clearly caught off guard. "What are you doing here?" I pushed past him into the room, my eyes immediately landing on the blonde woman hastily wrapping herself in a sheet. "Melissa," I presumed. "Mark," I started, my voice trembling. "How could you?" But to my shock, instead of apologizing or trying to explain, Mark's face hardened. "How could I? How could you, Catherine? You haven't satisfied me in months. All you care about is that baby." His words hit me like a physical blow. I staggered back, my vision blurring. Mark continued, his voice dripping with disgust, "You don't take care of yourself anymore. Look at Melissa," he waved towards his mistress. "That's how a woman should look. That's how you used to be." Melissa chose that moment to speak up, her voice sickeningly sweet. "You should be grateful to us, you know. We're being considerate, waiting for you to have the baby before Mark leaves you. We're the honest ones here." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Suddenly, a sharp pain lanced through my abdomen, far worse than anything I'd felt before. My vision darkened around the edges, and I felt myself losing balance. "Mark," I gasped, reaching out to him as I fell. "Please, call an ambulance." But Mark and Melissa were already moving, gathering their things. They roughly grabbed my arms and dragged me out into the hallway. "You brought this on yourself," Mark said coldly, stepping over me as I lay on the floor. The last thing I saw before I lost consciousness was their retreating figures, leaving me alone in my hour of need. I came to with a start, the concerned face of a hotel maid hovering over me. My whole body ached, and the pain in my abdomen was excruciating. "Ma'am, are you okay?" "I've called an ambulance," the maid said, her voice laced with worry. I tried to speak, but could only manage a weak groan. The next few hours passed in a blur of sirens, bright lights, and urgent voices. I drifted in and out of consciousness, always aware of the gnawing fear for my baby. When I finally fully regained consciousness, I was in a hospital bed. A doctor stood at my bedside, her face grave. "Mrs. Thompson," she said gently, "I'm so sorry. We did everything we could, but you've lost the baby." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I closed my eyes, hot tears streaming down my face. As the reality of what had happened sank in, my grief turned to anger. Mark, his mother, that woman Melissa, they were all responsible for this. They had killed my baby with their cruelty and selfishness. After being discharged, I went straight to our apartment. With mechanical efficiency, I packed all of Mark's belongings into boxes. Then, I drove to Linda's house. I dumped the boxes unceremoniously in her driveway, then marched up to her front door. Linda opened it, her face a mask of false concern. "Catherine, dear. I heard what happened. Such a shame," she said, not sounding sorry at all. I pushed past her into the house. "Save it, Linda. I know you don't care." She dropped the act immediately. "Well, what did you expect? It's for the best, really. Now you and Mark can get a divorce, and you can move out of that apartment." I stared at her, incredulous. "Move out? That apartment is half mine." Linda waved her hand dismissively. "Details. Mark has excellent lawyers, you know. They'll make sure he gets everything. You're not fit to be his wife, Catherine. You're too simple for him. It's best if you just leave quietly. Don't make a fuss." I felt my fists clench at my sides. "I will not leave quietly," I hissed. "I'm going to fight. For the apartment, for everything. Your son and his mistress killed my baby, and I won't let them get away with it." Linda's face paled slightly, but she quickly recovered. "Don't be dramatic, Catherine. These things happen. It's nobody's fault." As I turned to leave, a thought struck me. I faced Linda one last time. "Tell me something, Linda. How would you feel if you lost your child? If someone's cruelty and selfishness robbed you of your baby?" For the first time, Linda looked genuinely shaken. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, at a loss for words. I nodded, a grim satisfaction settling over me. That's what I thought. With a newfound determination, I reached out to my old college friend, Alex, who had become a successful divorce lawyer. When I explained my situation, he didn't hesitate. "I've got your back, Catherine," Alex assured me. "We'll make sure you get what you deserve." The court proceedings were grueling. Mark and Melissa put on a united front, denying their affair and painting me as a mentally unstable woman inventing stories after losing my baby. "Your Honor," Mark's lawyer argued, "Mrs. Thompson is clearly suffering from delusions brought on by her tragic loss. There is no affair, only a grieving woman's imagination." But Alex was prepared. With a nod from the judge, he presented the evidence we had gathered. "I'd like to submit these photographs into evidence," Alex announced, passing them to the judge. The courtroom buzzed as Mark and Melissa's faces paled. Then came the coup de grace. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we have video evidence from the Westview Hotel." The footage played, showing Mark and Melissa dragging my unconscious body into the hallway, laughing as they abandoned me. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Finally, the hotel maid testified, describing how she found me unconscious and called for help. By the time she finished, there wasn't a sympathetic face for Mark or Melissa in the room. The judge's verdict was swift and decisive. In light of the evidence presented, I rule in favor of Mrs. Thompson. Mr. Thompson will pay financial compensation for emotional distress, and all marital assets will be divided equally. As we left the courthouse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't a complete victory, nothing could bring back my baby, but it was a start. In the following weeks, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I bought a small apartment, started seeing a therapist, and slowly began to heal. Just as I was finding my footing, my phone rang with an unexpected caller, Linda. Catherine, her voice was uncharacteristically hesitant. Can we meet? Please? Every instinct told me to refuse, but curiosity won out. Fine. The cafe on 5th Street, tomorrow at 2. When I arrived at the cafe, I almost didn't recognize Linda. Gone was the haughty, well-put-together woman. In her place sat someone who looked broken. Catherine, she began, her voice trembling. I was wrong. About everything. She went on to explain how Melissa had manipulated Mark, turning him against his own mother. They were planning to sell Linda's house, leaving her with nothing. I've heard rumors, Linda continued, wiping away tears. They're planning something at the company. Something illegal. Catherine, I know I have no right to ask, but you're the only one who can stop them. I sat back, stunned. Part of me wanted to walk away, to let them destroy each other. But as Linda mentioned the company, my company, I felt a responsibility I couldn't ignore. With my legal background, diving into the company's documents wasn't as daunting as it might have been for others. I spent days poring over contracts, purchase orders, and financial reports, slowly piecing together a disturbing picture. Mark's department was consistently overpaying for goods, far above market rates. At first, I thought it might be incompetence, but as I dug deeper, a pattern emerged. The inflated prices always benefited the same handful of suppliers, and the discrepancies had started around the time Melissa joined the company. But the worst was yet to come. I uncovered plans for an upcoming major contract, one that could make or break the company's fiscal year. Mark was set to purchase substandard goods at premium prices, a move that would cripple the company's profits and reputation. With a file full of evidence, I marched into the CEO's office. Mr. Jameson looked up, surprised to see me. Catherine? What's this about? Sir, I said, my voice steady. I've uncovered something you need to see immediately. For the next hour, I laid out everything I'd found. Mr. Jameson's face grew grimmer with each passing minute. This is unbelievable, he finally said. Catherine, I can't thank you enough for bringing this to our attention. We'll launch a full investigation immediately. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I found myself at the center of an internal investigation, providing testimony and evidence. Mark and Melissa were suspended pending the outcome. When the dust settled, the evidence was irrefutable. The company filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Mark and Melissa, and criminal charges soon followed. I watched from the courtroom as they were both convicted, knowing they'd never hold positions of power again. In the aftermath, Mr. Jameson called me into his office again. This time, his face was beaming. Catherine, your work on this case was exemplary. We'd like to offer you a promotion to senior lawyer, along with this award for exceptional service to the company. I left his office with a new title and a plaque, feeling a mix of pride and bittersweet vindication. Weeks later, my phone rang. It was Linda. Catherine, she said, her voice choked with emotion. I heard what you did. You saved the company. You saved my house. I was so wrong about you. Can you ever forgive me? Linda, I replied softly, I forgive you. But I think it's best if we both move on with our lives separately. I understand, she said. Thank you, Catherine. For everything. As I hung up the phone, I felt a chapter of my life truly closing. The pain would always be there, a dull ache for the child I'd lost and the life I'd thought I'd have. But I'd also discovered a strength in myself I never knew existed.